when who you are, you realize that who you are has nothing to do with the thoughts that are going through your head. It is vaster and deeper. It is, you touch it when there's a moment of a gap between two thoughts. And you can never define that through thought. That's why sometimes in some meditation practices or some spiritual teachings, you use the words, the question, who am I, as a little mantra or a little pointer. Who am I? Now, that of course is still a thought. Those are still words. Who am I? This can actually work if you are alert and do not attempt to answer the question. Whatever answer you find after you ask, who am I, that's not it. Who am I? The answer is in the space of alert, silent presence after the question. Who am I? I don't know. Oh. That's it. That's it. You can't grasp it. It's the essence of identity, of what you feel. Everybody feels there's something very precious. I am precious. And this sense of preciousness that people, you don't want to lose that. Even people whose life is relatively unpleasant, they still don't want to lose their sense of I. But the sense of I gets usually mixed up with a story in the head. I am this, I am that. What we are doing here, we are attempting to take the sense of beingness or I or consciousness itself out of its identifications with form, which primarily are thought forms. So consciousness has been dreaming the dream of form. This is why, from the point of view of an awakened being, the normal human state is a dreamlike state. And if you discover that in yourself, if you get glimpses of, or many of you more than glimpses, of what it is to be present, and then you fall back into thinking, the qualitative difference is vast, and you can then see how the two dimensions in yourself, and many of you are going back and forth. Okay, you're present, and then something happens and you go back into and then something happens and you notice you're suffering. Oh, I forgot the primary purpose of my life, which is now. Okay. Oh, thank God. I thought there were lots of problems, but there isn't actually a problem. That's an amazing realization. There is no problem. And then the old machine in the head goes, what do you mean there's no problem? You better start thinking about your problems. You're not going to solve your problems by just sitting there. An amazing realization is in the present moment there is only what is, but there are no problems. Don't take your thoughts too seriously, because thought is form, beginning of form. And when you don't take your thoughts too seriously, and that of course implies, I wouldn't say to anybody, because still a majority of humans are so identified with their thought that the statement, don't take your thoughts too seriously, would be meaningless. What? And the thought would immediately react to that statement. What are you talking about? Because not being able anybody who can listen to this and can endure sitting here, not just for 2 hours, but a whole weekend, means there is space within you already. From there you can listen. Otherwise, if you were totally identified with thought, you would either fall asleep, thought would switch off, or you would become so anxious, restless, you couldn't stand it anymore, or you would become reactive. Thought would react, it would feel threatened. Your very thought-based identity would feel threatened by every word. And then you would shout something and run out. In a final attempt to be right. Which is the ego's great thing. And before anybody can challenge you, you run out. But it has happened. So not taking your mind too seriously, and then that leads to inevitably not taking your life situation too seriously. Handle it well, and you will, because there's presence. When you're not in your mind, you do handle situations that arise with care. You give it attention. So it is, you take care of the now and whatever arises in it, because your attention is there. It's not somewhere else where you want to be. So you are truly responsible for this. You take responsibility for life, which is now, which means you have the ability to respond to the now fully. And yet, despite the fact that there is care, you don't take it that seriously, because you don't take your mind that seriously, which means it does not have the heaviness to it that otherwise it has when all you know is the forms with which you identify as me. Then they're very serious, and every event that happens and challenges even in the slightest your idea of how things should be will lead to reactivity, anxiety, anger, fear. There's no space anymore. And you can always sense in a person the loss of inner spaciousness or presence, stillness, when they are being challenged. And that can happen through a challenge. And you get drawn back into, suddenly it matters. And it could be a tiny thing or a big thing. It's the same reaction. And that's to be lost. To be lost, what in India they would say, lost in illusion. Lost in form. Lost in an illusory sense of self, because every form, you need the form to give you your sense of self. In other words, you don't know who you are. beginning of suffering. You don't know yourself. Not that you could ever know yourself in the sense that the mind knows an object in awareness. You can't know yourself in that way. And there are people who are seeking self-realization for 20, 30 and 40 years, believing that they could know themselves in the same way that they know an object in the external world. They believe, and they're looking for self-realization, thinking at some point I will know who I am, but they're looking for it on the level of objects in consciousness. I will have a complete knowledge of me. That what means, who is having that knowledge? You forgot the one, the I, that has the knowledge. And you say, now I know myself, there it is. So you make yourself into an object in consciousness and know a lot about yourself. That's all you can ever do when you make yourself into an object. You can know vast amounts about yourself, and it will be very complex. Because the longer you study the self, the more complex it gets. And there are layers and layers of things. Not that, again, that may have its place for a while. But you can't know yourself in that way. You cannot become an object to yourself, an object in awareness. That's the ego. That is the sense of the little me. The egoic sense of self is the very thing. You have made yourself into a mental object, and you have a relationship with that mental object. It's me, and you have a dialogue. It talks to itself. And this is the amazing thing, to have a relationship with yourself means then who is the self and who is the one who is having the relationship. And every relationship you have with yourself is problematic. It's always a problematic relationship with yourself. It can't not be problematic because you have made yourself into an object in consciousness. You don't know yourself as consciousness. You think you're something that arises in consciousness, which is a form, a mind form, an image, consisting of many factors, but a mental image. And there we have the essence of self-delusion, of not knowing yourself. And it's called egoic sense of self, me. And so some people who look for enlightenment look on that level, if they could find themselves there, as if they could become an object of knowledge, of consciousness. And you can't. So, and that's why those who reach that realization when their search on that level becomes totally frustrated. That's another way. Either all the forms leave you, or you've been seeking and seeking, spiritually perhaps, for a long time, and finally you say, I give up. 30 years I've been meditating, and I've seen all the teachers. What's the point? And you come to the end of seeking, which is the end of future, and then you sit under a tree, and suddenly you're not looking for some new form to add to you. For the first time in 30 years, after 30 years of spiritual practice, which without knowing it actually was an attempt to add something to me. Another form, and it was called perhaps enlightenment. I want to add the ultimate jewel into what I already have. The crowning achievement of my what's it called in America? CV, curriculum vitae, my resume. And you sit under a tree and no longer try to add anything. And suddenly, there it is. Future collapses. Future as a need collapses. You don't need to add any new form to me anymore. You're done with all that.